Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads. Today we are doing our monthly tier list, and we are going to tackle again Star Wars canon comics. We've done this list once before, or I should say, I have back in, I believe, September 2021. It's a tier list that's needed updating for a while. This is 2 years in the making. We're going to break it down by series, so we're not going to break it down by arc, otherwise, we'll be here forever. We're going to include every single miniseries in the Star Wars Marvel line. We're including every single ongoing in the Star Wars Marvel line, and then we're concluding all of the Marvel one shots as well. We did not include the IDW or Dark Horse stuff like Star Wars Adventures, Return to Vader's Castle, those types of things, but we did include the High Republic Dark Horse and IDW stuff because we have read that. We also not including comic book adaptations of other things, so we're not including sequel adaptations, the anthology movie adaptations, the Mandalorian adaptations, or the Thrawn adaptation. This video is being recorded before Dark Droids starts, so we're not including Dark Droids. We're also not including the Return of the Jedi one-shot series. That is not fully out yet, so we're not going to include that. Otherwise, we have 59 other things for you here to rank, and it's going to be hopefully a fun video that you all enjoy. Make sure you hit that like button and you're subscribing to the channel. All right, let's get into the first comic here. We are going in release order, and that means we're going to start with Darth Maul, Son of Dathomir. Darth Maul, Son of Dathomir is a great miniseries, but it ties in nicely, tells an important story, which I always like from comics. I'd say this is an A tier.
Yeah, I would say this is also an 8 day for me. I absolutely love how Maul is handled here, and his interactions with Count Dooku were something I've always wanted, and I just didn't realize how satisfying it would be. Otherwise, very kinetic series. I really enjoyed it. Our next one is Star Wars 2015. It's up, it's down. There was a period where I got really frustrated, then they were really starting to pick it up again. The ending, I don't think was great. So for me, bottom of B or top of C.
Wow. Okay. I was going to say A tier. I think Jason Aaron's run starts out incredible, and then Vader Down I thought was great. Everything after Vader Down I thought was pretty average. Then when Kieran Gillen takes over, Kieran Gillen actually does a really good job in this series. There's 2, 3 arcs that I think are really great. I believe Hope Dies is one that was really good. And then Greg Pak, I would agree, when he takes over, is the weakest of the entire series. But I still think amongst the rest of these series, I would say it's an A tier. I think I'd put it below Darth Maul, Son of Dathomir. I think the good stuff, the great stuff, outweighs the negative by a large margin.
It's really the Greg Pak stuff that disappointed me. I thought the Jason Aaron stuff was fine.
So if we compromise with that, I put it B tier. So that means we move on to the 2015 run of Darth Vader by Kieran Gillen. Darth Vader, I thought, was another great series. This was a companion with Star Wars, like all the Darth Vader Star Wars series have mostly been. You get Vader Down here. You also get when Vader finds out about Luke being his son, which is still one of my favorite canon things. It's overshadowed, I think, nowadays by Dark Lord of the Sith, Charles Soule's run. But I think amongst Star Wars canon comics, this is still an S tier comic. This is still one of the high bars that we have set here with Star Wars comics.
Yeah, absolutely S tier. The villain is great. And just seeing him, Vader, become more than just like a random shadow, but more of like an established military leader taking what he wants, finally having some autonomy away from just being a murder bot. The Princess Leia miniseries, don't really like it. I don't really like the art style either, to be honest. There's some really nice connective stuff, like with her mother and just the meaning of what it means to be an Alderaanian post Alderon's destruction. The only thing I really cared about was when we saw the rebellion structure and kind of how they trying to keep her away from being in charge, which I thought was a pretty good development. But other than that, it's like a C or a D for me.
I'd go I'd go C. Leia was at the time something that was really really disappointing, especially because Mark Wade wrote this, and Mark Wade is one of the great superhero comic book writers of all time. In general, this got more malign than it necessarily deserves. Like I would even say that we could possibly put this bottom of B, but I'm okay with C because I think in general there are a lot of other miniseries here that are a higher quality than Princess Leia was. But let's get on to Kanan, which was kind of a maxi series. I think it was originally billed as an ongoing, but it stopped after 12 issues, kind of like the Han Solo series stopped after 10. Kanan is great. I thought this was an excellent series, retcons and all. I think even with the changes that have been made in the Bad Batch, if we look at this as a singular piece of art, this is a wonderful comic. I would say A tier. I don't think it's quite as good as something like Darth Vader or some of the things we'll put in S, but I would say it definitely belongs in A.
Yeah, I was gonna say A minus or B. I really like the development of seeing Kanan from just before Order 66 and then to after. Obviously, we start off with the Order 66 stuff. But yeah, I'll give it bottom of May. Our next one is Lando by Charles Soule. Yeah, what an introduction as a Star Wars comic writer. It was an excellent, excellent miniseries. I love the art style. We get to see Lobot's kind of origin of becoming a Lobot, and it's very tragic. I'm tempted to give this an S, but I can go for an A.
This is a great series, and I think amongst these character miniseries, this is by far the best one. Lando did stuff that was unexpected. It gave heart to other characters and also humanized a character who had kind of always been a little more one note in the films. I would give it an S. I think when you look amongst the rest of this, I would be happy with it up an S. I think it still holds up. All right, let's talk about Shattered Empire next. This was one of the most anticipated Star Wars comics that was coming out. Shattered Empire, I still think is good. I think it's better than Aftermath by a long shot. It definitely tells a story that's not as expansive as many of us were hoping, but I think in general it captures the immediate post Return of the Jedi period pretty well. I like the series. I'd put it in B behind Star Wars.
Yeah, I agree with the placement. Poe Dameron's parents, Shara Bey. I love her character, and I like how she's been coming with Kess a lot. Luke is pretty great in this. Leia is pretty great in this with Operation Cinder and all that. It's not bad looking back at it, and the art style is very beautiful. If there was a little bit more for this miniseries or not, I think this could have been easily an A. S tier, could have been definitely living up to the hype. Our next series is Chewbacca, and oh boy, so bad. I have refused to even refresh myself on this. You don't even get to get like Chewbacca's internal monologue or anything, which would have been much nicer, right? But it's an F. It's an easy F for me.
I was going to say D. I think it's more maligned than it should be, but it also is a step down from Leia, which was already disappointing. This is a very simple story. We don't learn anything new. I think there are some much, much worse stuff than this. So I would argue for D. If you're really passionate about F, I'm also okay with that.
I am.
Let's move to Obi-Wan and Anakin, which was Charles Soule's second miniseries here in canon. Obi-Wan and Anakin looks beautiful. The art is fantastic. It's a story that I think gets the characters pretty well, but the overall plot I remember always being quite disappointing. In general, this plot doesn't really change anything about how we understand the adventures of Obi-Wan and Anakin, especially in canon where we don't really have anything on Anakin's early days as an apprentice. What I always loved about this series was it got that Obi-Wan and Anakin relationship down, and the way Obi-Wan looks at Anakin as his apprentice, the expectations he sets for himself. And there's a line in here about him saying that he would leave the Jedi Order if Anakin left because he feels that devoted to Qui-Gon. Still, though, I would put this in B.
I'll put it as B. I really enjoyed the stuff that we got out of Anakin and Palpatine's relationship. Obi-Wan's quite good here too. I like his dynamic with Anakin and the real possibility of him leaving, which would have been very cool. My problem is I don't really find like the events that interesting, the ships, the endless war, and the lack of communication. Next up is the Poe Dameron comic series, ongoing. I really love this. I think for me, seeing him as a pilot, seeing his dynamic, seeing how he was like dealing with the Cold War elements. That was very cool. His shenanigans with the First Order was very cool. Maybe I'd put this top of A.
I like Poe Dameron. I never loved it. I thought Poe Dameron does a great job at building out Black Squadron. It does a good job of making us care a bit more about the Resistance, which is a faction that I think still needs a lot more development. This helps at least establish a bit more of the rapport of the group, what they are, what they do. And I always enjoyed that. Charles Soule's writing, always good. So I like this series, but I personally would put it in B, and I'd put it below Star Wars.
I am willing to actually put it under Star Wars. I know I put it there personally.
C3PO one shot special. This was an interesting choice. I love the cover. I've always loved the cover, thought it was great. It explains why C3PO got his red arm in The Force Awakens, which was a thing that really never needed to be there because it disappears at the end of the movie. Interesting, weird story. I think it got overly criticized when it came out. I'd put it in C or bottom of B.
I was gonna put it somewhere in the middle of B or bottom of B. I think it is quite emotional. I don't know. It felt so beautiful, and I like that it was adapted into the Force Awakens Lego Star Wars game as well. Next up, we have the Han Solo miniseries. It's fine. Han kind of gets into this race to help the rebellion as like a one last act, while also playing into more of his wiles. Nothing incredible. I could really put it like a C for me.
It was pretty forgettable, so I'm glad with it in C. It's a little better than Princess Leia. I do love the covers on this. But let's move into Dr. Aphra. This is the 2016 line. Dr. Aphra is a great series. I've never thought Dr. Aphra was an S tier, if I'm being honest, but I love what she represents for the comics, a character that was created in comics and was popular enough to get her own series. The stories here for me are always really fun, very entertaining. I'm happy with it pretty much anywhere in A. Maybe put it behind Darth Maul.
I would go top of it. It's not as good as Lando, and I think it misses some things here and there. She's like a darker Indiana Jones who constantly rejects her conscience and is pretty fun about it and very silly about it. But seeing like the Ordu aspect and all that stuff was how the Force changed over years and how the galaxy changed. She's our only first insight into the canon as a lore freak myself. I was like, yeah, I want to. I love all this tastes here. Amazing for what canon can be and what it is right now. Our next one is the Darth Maul miniseries. I wanted to like this. I really love how kinetic and energetic it is. Seeing Darth Maul before Episode One, it was interesting because this Jedi herself is also like very like non-Jedi. She's showing the signs of everything wrong with the Jedi. I would put it as like a bottom of B.
Yeah, I really liked this book when it came out. I remember the reviews were not good, but I'm happy with Bottom of B. I could even put it above Shattered Empire. I think it's a really cool action comic. It does give us an important event in Maul's life for canon, with him killing the first Jedi he's ever gotten to kill. All right, let's move on to the one we all know where this is going. This is Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith, Charles Soule's 2017 Darth Vader comic. I love this book. It's one of my favorite comics of all time in Star Wars. Got to put it at the top of S. It's easily the best in canon.
I mean, it's so strange to see Kyan Gillan's series usurped, but when it came out, it was immediate. Like, as great as that one was, this one was something else. It's just, the art style is beautiful. I love seeing like the full Sith version of Vader when he goes into those visions and all that. It's insane. Building his castle, all these monumental things that weren't really ever there in Legends the same way. Yeah, top of S for sure. Our next one is the one shot Rogue One Cassian and K2SO special. Surprisingly, very early into Rogue One days, I thought it'd be more like 5 years or something, like a long running relationship. It's fine. I don't really remember most of it. I just remember the reprogramming and then the instant dynamic that forms. Bottom of B.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair spot. More than most one shots, especially movie tie-in one shots. This actually tells a story that is quite important for Star Wars. But let's get into another one that was quite disappointing. This actually killed an entire line of comics. This was the Star Wars Jedi of the Republic, I believe it was called, Mace Windu miniseries. This was supposed to start a Jedi of the Republic series, kind of like we had the Jedi one shots back in early prequel Legends era. I like the concept of the story. I like seeing younger Mace Windu. I think development for Mace Windu, especially in canon, is much needed, but this wasn't it. The art was really, really strange. The dimensions just always seemed off. It's always seemed like late Frank Miller art. The story was really bland and kind of basic. I wanted a lot more from this. I'd say it's F tier.
I would maybe say D minus F. And that's me being generous as a generational Mace Windu hater. Top of F, sure. Next up is the Captain Phasma miniseries, and I honestly thought that's quite good. I was always expecting her to be alive after The Force Awakens, but it's pretty ruthless of a miniseries and very, very manipulative. So I would say mid B.
Mid B, maybe after Maul or after Shattered Empire, around there. This was a series that when I first read it, I was kind of disappointed in because I felt like I wanted more from it. I wanted more character for Phasma. Next, we have The Last Jedi Storms of Crate one shot. I don't remember disliking this story. Story's simple, it's basic, it's about a time in the rebellion when they used the base on Crate that you see in The Last Jedi. I'd say it's bottom of C, maybe top of D.
Yeah, I would say around the same there. Next up, we have The Last Jedi One Shot, DJ Most Wanted. There's really nothing I like about this. The silliest version possible of this character. It's an F.
Yeah, this is the worst Star Wars comic I've ever read, I think. It's really bad. It's the bare minimum approach that Star Wars comics have often taken in canon, where we just trying to capitalize on the movie. Let's just make something that has a character in the movie. The absolute bare bones, most minimum type of story you could possibly tell about DJ. We learn nothing about him that we didn't already know from the film, and we already don't know much. Another comic book that was very underwhelming and disappointing was Lando Double or Nothing. This was a comic series that I was looking forward to considering the quality of the last Lando book. I think in general, amongst miniseries, this is one of the weaker ones I've read. I'd say D tier for me.
Yeah, I'll give it D tier as well. Ugh, I almost want to say F tier because I don't think the characterization here of Lando is quite good. He's so annoying. He's such a terrible person. Next up is Beckett. It's pretty good for what it is. It shows kind of Vel and Rio and that whole gang and that whole dynamic. It's just a dumb job that kind of connects to Enfys Nest that was planned by her. I'd give it like a C.
Yeah, I like this one a lot more than DJ. Beckett, I think in general, is a more interesting, more compelling character. There was a bit more to glean out of this than there was in DJ. I'd say it is a C. It's a decent story. Next is Han Solo Imperial Cadet, one I put off for a long time. I don't think by any means it's an A or an S. I would put it firmly in B, but this is nonetheless the best of the Han Solo tie-ins that we got from Solo Star Wars Story. It introduces the character of Valance, who ends up becoming a major part of the Bounty Hunters line and Target Vader as well, into canon. It would be under Poe Dameron for me, but anywhere after that, I'm good with it. I think it's a really solid, underrated story.
Yeah, this is one I got to keep up with when it was coming out, and I was very happy because, yeah, Valance is a great example there. I like his friends too, the dynamic, how he's always trying to be that good guy, even if he is doing conscientious objector, a move possible while he's still doing things for the Empire as a cadet. Yeah, I would put it behind Poe Dameron for sure. It's good. Next up, we have Age of Republic. These are all just different one shots of Jedi kind of all tied together. Good, not incredible. I'd say this is the strongest one of the Ages series, probably. I thought the Count Dooku one was pretty awesome. I would give it, though, like a mid B.
Actually, for Age of Republic, I would say upper B for me. This one is the best out of all of the Age of series. I loved what they did here with Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon especially, but the Jango Fett issue was excellent. That's some of the only stuff we've gotten from Jango Fett. But overall, Jango Fett was great. Grievous finally got to see kind of a horrific look at Grievous. Dooku was really good. All the villain ones were excellent. I'd say upper B, maybe right above Han Solo for me, honestly. It's right in that upper echelon of B tier. Next is Vader Dark Visions, which is it's a look at Darth Vader from other people's perspectives. It's kind of the legend of Vader being played out in a variety of different ways, variety of different art styles. I think it's okay. I didn't hate this series. I would say C tier. Honestly, just kind of for that first one alone where Vader is like attacking like a big kraken looking thing, like a big huge monster.
Vader has been incredible in canon, except for this. This is terrible. I like the first one, and then you have something like some woman falling in love with Vader, and then he just pulls out his lightsaber and kills her. I was just like, it's a D for me. I can't excuse the first one being fun for the rest of them being so. Why? The next one, Age of Rebellion. All these one shots connected together. Definitely a step down from Age of Republic, which I thought was good. The only thing I can really think about is the Tarkin one and kind of like his imagination of like cutting up and beating up that trooper. I almost want to say like top of C.
Yeah, I was going to say bottom of B. I think this is the weakest of the Age of series. And that kind of has to do with the fact that these are the characters we've explored the most in Star Wars comics. So there wasn't that much to do that was different. I'm okay with this at top of C. I think for me, I would have put it in B, probably ahead of C3PO and K2SO. Let's move on to TIE Fighter. This was a tie into the Alphabet Squadrons novel. This is a solid book. Again, Jodie Hauser writes this one, and I think she does a good job here. I would say bottom of B.
I haven't read Alphabet Squadron or anything, so I don't know how well this is tying into it. Yeah, I'd say top of C. Looking back, I don't really like much of the squad, to be honest. So that's where I'd put it, but I'm fine with bottom of B. Next up is Galaxy's Edge miniseries. Hondo being in the sequel trilogy era does make me quite happy. This was fine. It absolutely was fine. I'd give it a C.
Yeah, I think it can be a C book. I think it's better than it has a right to be with it being a theme park tie-in, but I would put it behind Age of Rebellion and C. I think it was fine. Next is Target Vader. This one is fine also. I think for the Valance stuff here, that's one of the reasons I enjoyed this series. I'd say maybe this is a C tier as well for me.
Yeah, I would put this as a C tier, but it's stuff that I feel like even the more blander Bounty Hunters has done well. And I guess you can look at this as like a prelude to bounty hunters as a series as a whole. Our next one is Age of Resistance, and honestly, I feel like they only got worse and worse. I'm gonna play it safe and call it a C. For the life of me, nothing comes to mind.
I'd actually say this is a firm B for me. I like this series. I think especially the Kylo Ren ones. This was again the dark side stuff was so much better. It was Kylo Ren's was really interesting. The Hux one was actually quite good, and the Snoke one was also very interesting. Always exploring these characters in the sequel timeline is good because they don't have that much to them, outside of the film. So anytime we can get more information on them, I've always enjoyed it. I thought the Rose one was actually pretty good too. It gave her some backstory. I'd say it's B, maybe right behind Shattered Empire above Phasma. I think it was pretty solid.
I guess my memory got jogged again. I will say yes, the Kylo Ren stuff in the Snoke one was very good.
Next, we have Jedi Fallen Order Dark Temple. This was a tie in to the Jedi Fallen Order video game, told a little bit of backstory about Seer Junda and her master back when she was a Padawan. I thought we got some good looks at her as an apprentice, the way she's kind of strong headed. We get to see, I guess, a little bit of Cal in her. Cordova, really good too, but overall the plot was kind of simple and a little too basic for me. I'd be good with bottom of B or top of C.
Yeah, I'd say top of C. Yes, the arrogance, the cockiness of Seer is pretty hilarious to see in hindsight, especially after Jedi Survivor. I don't really care about like the villains here, which I think should have been pretty important for this to work. It's a top of C for me. Next one is Star Wars Allegiance. It's not great. I think the coolest part was maybe going back to Mon Cala and having that direct connection to Dark Lord of the Sith. It was fine, but it wasn't Shattered Empire level for me, so I put it like bottom of C.
Yeah, this was always one of my least favorite miniseries in Star Wars canon. I thought Resistance Reborn was a little surface level, but if that's surface level, this is really surface level. And this deals more with Rey than that book does. That book's more Finn and Poe. Love the covers, but for me, this would be a D or an F. Since you said C, let's drop it in D. Let's move on to one of the better sequel tie-in comics, which is The Rise of Kylo Ren. This was a 4-issue miniseries from Charles Soule, and one that I thought was pretty great. There are a lot of things about this that I wish were a little different in terms of I wish there was another issue, or at least I wish there was more story here. But I recently went back and reread this, and I think the story here is really, really strong. I want more about Luke's Jedi Order. I want more about a lot of things having to do with when Ben leaves the Jedi Temple and all that time period. And there's a lot more to explore here in the future. I think for a book called The Rise of Kylo Ren, there could have been more, but I think the story told in general is really solid. I'd put this at the bottom of A.
I would put it just ahead of Kanan. What Charles Soule does here is fantastic. I really like Ty and Vo and all his friends. Loved seeing the Knights of Ren in their flashbacks, and I love seeing Snoke's history with him too. Yeah, I like it right there in front of Kanan. This is Star Wars 2020. Honestly, I'm really enjoying Charles Soule's take on this, and to be given something this monumental after having so many miniseries, and this could have easily been phoned in a lot of ways, but this has been really cool. I really like all the stuff with Luke, the stuff with their High Republic connections. Leia's going through a lot of things. Obviously, the tie into the War of the Bounty Hunters is where this kind of stalls out for a little bit. Shara Bay, all these characters being introduced, it feels like a huge ensemble comic. I like this so far a lot more than I've liked the Jason Aaron stuff. I will give this a bottom of A so far. I'm really happy with it.
Yeah, I think this has been more consistent than the 2015 one run was across the board. I think so far for me, the 2015 run has had more seminal stories than this has. I think in general, the Star Wars line hasn't done anything outside of a couple issues here and there that's made me go, "Wow, that was amazing." I'm hoping it ends with a bang. And again, we're ranking this in 2023 in July, so it's not done yet, and we'll see how it wraps up because the end of the Star Wars 2015 line is definitely the weakest part of it. I personally would lean towards the original 2015 line ahead of it right now, but I'm fine with it there. I think overall this is going to end as a tighter, better comic by the time we get to its finale. But let's get into Greg Pak's 2020 Darth Vader. It's a roller coaster for sure. It started out great. I think last time we ranked it, I ranked it in A because all we had was the first arc, which is one of the best Vader arcs we've ever gotten in Star Wars comics. The second arc, which I really enjoy about Exegol. And then since War of the Bounty Hunters on Vader, it has been very up and down. When we've gotten back to the Handmaidens and that story, it's been quite solid. When we've done these like anti-hero Avengers type weird characters, I have not really enjoyed it. I think that would make it a B for me. I think it can end stronger though. If it ends really strong, I think it could round out into a solid A.
Pretty much all the same points. I also like when we get to see him what his internal monologue and like the red font and everything else. That's really cool. The huge part about Vader has been order, order, order. That's the way to do things. And this is the first time I felt a little muddled by it. As messy as it is, I love seeing Ochi. Ochi's hilarious. So I'll give it like top of B behind Poe Dameron. All right, next up is one that I've described so many times as the Fast and Furious as the Star Wars comics, and that is the Bounty Hunters comics. Doesn't start off that bad, honestly. Seeing a lot of connection between Boba Fett, Valance. Yeah, it's not great either. These are characters that I like seeing. I definitely like seeing Falam and Zuckuss. They're hilarious. They're like an old married couple, and I like Zuckuss being like, "Get out of the car now." That was like one of my favorite panels in recent. It's like a bottom of B series for me. I still have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, I'm torn where to rank this one because I feel like it's never been great, like ever. It's always been an average series. The fact that it has maintained a C plus B minus level the entire time it's existed is kind of a credit to it. It knows what it is and it goes for it. I would also say it's a C because it's been average the whole time. I guess for the respect of it being decent the entire time,
Yeah.
I'd say bottom of B is fine. Next, let's get into the Afro 2020 line. The Afro 2020 line to me started out much weaker than the 2016 line. Post War of the Bounty Hunters, it's been one of the few series that since War of the Bounty Hunters has absolutely found its legs. And I think this series has gotten better and better as we've gone on. I'd say it's a top of B for me.
Yeah, I have a lot of the same points. The first arc is classic Afra, but kind of dimmed down with like a lot of her university friends and like Lucky and all these other characters. The latest stuff with the Spark Eternal has been great. The tie-in with Hidden Empire has been decent too. Afra has definitely rounded into form. Bringing a lot of her old friends back has definitely helped too. Yeah, maybe behind Darth Vader. I think that's where I'd put it right now. We're gonna switch gears here. We're gonna get into the whole High Republic phase because that changed everything about Star Wars for us on our channel and for a lot of the fandom. Pretty good. We were reading these at singles, so we had a lot of great times with it. But in some ways, the High Republic Adventures kind of grew into being almost as good of a series, if not better, in some issues. But a very strong comic for Phase One, so I would put it middle of B.
It's interesting looking at phase one because I think when we were ranking the High Republic stuff, I think it's undoubtedly a B tier comic. When we look at the rest of Star Wars comics, it borders lines on A for me. It's a strong ongoing that has a consistent set of characters. I think the first half is as good as a lot of Star Wars comics we've ever gotten. I think it starts to falter a bit in the second half when the initiative continues to push. But overall, the characters are strong, the writing is strong, and the art is solid. I like it very narrowly, probably an A for me. I'd say I'd still rank the Star Wars 2015 line over it personally, so I'm okay with top of B.
Honestly, I'm pretty convinced by that argument. I think I'm sometimes a little too harsh.
Sounds good. Well, let's look at Adventures because you mentioned it. Adventures does round into where I think High Republic Marvel starts out really strong and then tails off a little towards the middle. Adventures starts out pretty weak and gets a lot better because of its continued dissection of its characters, its young adult characters. I don't know if I like it enough to put it in A. I think I'd put it right behind Star Wars 2015 in B.
Yes, I really like this character of Zine. I think definitely adds a new element here. When Rom Jamorum kind of comes from Race to Crash Point Tower, it makes this also quite fun as well. I wish it ended more definitively instead of just like, oh, a bit of a cliffhanger, but not really, and not really. I don't know. It didn't feel like the ending of the series was valued as much as it should have been. Yeah, I'd say behind Star Wars 2015 though. It was incredible how it made a comeback. Next up, we have War of the Bounty Hunters. It's basically about what happens when Boba has lost Han, right? And it's all like they're all being thrown around. It's pretty good as its own thing. I think reading it with all the other singles of the different ongoing series, it was a little exhausting because it was kind of different POVs of the same thing that we already saw it. I think it's pretty good. I would put it near to the top of B.
Yeah, I think War of the Bounty Hunters is great, honestly. I think this is an A tier comic as a miniseries, as good or better than Shadows of the Empire. I'd put it in an A personally. I would even put it above like his Star Wars line and his High Republic as well.
Okay, I still like the Star Sign a little bit more, but Right, it's definitely ahead of Marvel's High Republic for me. That's I can give you that for sure.
Let's move on to High Republic Adventures, The Monster of Temple Peak. The Monster of Temple Peak was a pretty disappointing miniseries, especially because it was coming from Kevin Scott. This was about the character of Ty York. Monster of Temple Peak was kind of a circular story, one that doesn't have the growth for the character that I wanted. I don't think it's as bad as anything in the D tier of this list. So even though I think we put it in D tier of High Republic, I would say it's a bottom of C tier in Star Wars comics tier list.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the best thing you can say about it is that there's nothing offensive about it. The twist of like, oh, the villains are actually the people, not the monster itself. Was like, yeah, kind of saw that coming. So yeah, bottom of C behind. I'd say, actually no, just ahead of Beckett, just ahead of Beckett for sure. Right. Next up is the very first Star Wars manga with an original story instead of just an adaptation, and that is the High Republic: Edge of Balance. Lily is a very monotonous character too, and that is kind of her personality and how she breaks out of it. It's cool to see Banshee. Seeing the manga art style is incredible in Star Wars because it was so beautiful and detailed. It's hard. I don't want to be rude to it, but it is like a C.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. It's a C tier. I wish embraced being a manga a bit more. I think that's always been the thing that's disappointed me. Kind of an entry level into the High Republic story. I was hoping for a bit more manga-isms and like make it a story that's inspired by what makes Japanese manga so great. I think it's better than Monster of Temple Peak. So let's get into Trail of Shadows, the High Republic miniseries from Daniel Jose Older. Trail of Shadows was a miniseries that blew us away when it started. The first 3 issues are excellent. And then when it started to tie in a bit to the overall series in the last couple issues, I thought it declined. I'd put it in A tier, probably right behind War of the Bounty Hunters, but ahead of Phase 1.
Yeah, all the same points. The ending being so tied into Fallen Star, it affects a lot of like the surrounding books and comics, especially because this was so good as an investigative noir. I love Emma Catherine Sean Holt, and I think there's a really good dynamic. Yeah, around there, it's an A for sure. At one point, it was looking like the greatest of all time. Next up is the Life Day special one shot. Life Day was never great when it was introduced. It's kind of silly and fun here, which is I'm glad they're leaning into that. Forgettable. I'd say it's like bottom of D.
I don't know if I'd say it's bottom of D. I think it's a fun story, but it is very forgettable. I'd say bottom of C personally for me, but I guess we're splitting hairs there.
Okay, yeah.
Next is Crimson Reign. Crimson Reign was the follow up to War of the Bounty Hunters. It furthered Kira's story and the story of Crimson Dawn. This was a very interesting series, especially because the way at least Marvel was kind of selling the War of the Bounty Hunters, Crimson Reign, and Hidden Empire series was like this big trilogy that was going to kind of cap off everything that happened in between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, the big like underworld trilogy of Star Wars comics. And while I think it's really cool we got that trilogy, Crimson Reign was really interesting because it was basically like build up Crimson Dawn. Let's show everybody who's in Crimson Dawn and give them a little bit of a featurette. For me, it's a bottom of B tier, but I wish it was as good as War of the Bounty Hunters.
Yeah, same thoughts there. The best parts were like the Ochi death stick issues. I like the Ochi's insecurities being really pointed out here. Yeah, bottom of B, somewhere around there for me too. Next up is the 2 oversized Eye of the Storm one shots, I guess, issues, whatever you're gonna call them. Fantastic. We get to see a lot more of Mark Yount's father and his grandmother. Second issue is really the end of Phase 3. It's an epilogue in some ways, but it's a definitive capper. I want to say S because of how good it is, but I think 2 issues kind of holds it back a little bit.
I'd say yes. I think this is still amongst the best Star Wars comics we've ever gotten, or at least in canon. It's such a boundary pusher for the High Republic, and it's actually a very critical story for that initiative. Put it right behind Darth Vader. I think I might put it above Lando. Halcyon Legacy is next. Halcyon Legacy is the tie-in to the now defunct Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser Hotel. I think Galaxy's Edge is actually better than it. I would say this is a C tier. The stories told here are fun, but the overarching story with Doc Ondar and Galaxy's Edge, I enjoyed more than the overarching story with the pirates and stuff in this one. So I would say bottom of C tier.
Yeah, I think that's a good placement for it too. I like the different eras that it explores. It's fine. It's better than the hotel apparently because it got to at least finish its purpose. So next up is the Han Solo and Chewbacca series, which I thought started pretty well. There's some characters that have been introduced that have now tied over to bounty hunters, which I think makes this in a similar way to Han Solo Imperial Cadet, like a staging ground for grander stories for characters who grow to hate Han, but also can't help but admire him. There's just not enough weight to it, I'd say ultimately. So I'd say maybe like a B minus.
Yeah, that's where I was gonna go. Bottom of B, maybe above Bounty Hunters, right around that level.
Yeah.
I think the first part of it is pretty good. I think the narrative as a whole was dragged out a bit too long. I would have preferred to see a couple smaller arcs than one longer arc. Yeah, it was fine. I'd say bottom of B. Next is Obi-Wan. This is a miniseries about the life of Obi-Wan Kenobi when he's kind of writing his journals. Amongst these flashback vignette series, this is one of the better ones. There are some parts of Obi-Wan's life that I would like to see explored more. I think especially the early days issue comes to mind, like the very first issue where explore him as a youngling still living on Coruscant. But overall, I like this. It would be a middle to bottom of B for me as well.
It's fine. I was hoping for a little bit more gravitas, especially because there's such distinct eras for Obi-Wan being one of the main characters of Star Wars. Best comic one I felt was maybe the one with like the clone commander who goes like crazed like about what's like this is it's almost like the apocalypse now kind of feeling of like what is this death and destruction you're dealing with? Maybe ahead of Phasma. All right. Next up we have some of the most recent things, and this is going to be the High Republic Phase 2 from Marvel. Pretty good. I especially love like the Convocation of the Force. We get to see what's going on with the Great Jedi Protector statue, which is wild, right? It's good. It doesn't have any incredible peaks. It definitely leans on some stuff that are in Battle of Jedi and some of the other books. B, maybe, like somewhere in the middle of B, yeah.
Yep, another B tier for me. I think towards the top of B personally. I would have liked it to continue past Battle of Jeddah, like Phase 1 did, be a bit more expansive, but it does a good job with what it does, and I enjoyed it for the most part. I would say, yeah, I would maybe right behind Adventures Phase 1.
Yeah. All right. For a Hidden Empire, I mean, this is the culmination of all these tie-in crossover events. I don't think it's as incredible as I was hoping it to be, especially after War of the Hunters being so strong and solid as its own. I think this is probably the one where all the storylines tied in pretty well. It's just a little bit more of a softer ending to this than I expected. I put it behind Dr. Aphra 2020. I'd say it was good. Next up is the Yoda series, still ongoing, but I've actually been really surprised by it. I think it's hard to really think of Yoda as just anything other than old. And this series is not trying to change that, but it's trying to show like how he dealt with different things with different eras. So I liked a lot of the stuff that was happening in the High Republic era. A lot of stuff with Count Dooku and that connection there is very good. Definitely scribed the same way as the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, but I feel like it's a lot better. Right now, I would put this so far ahead of Dr. Aphra and both Darth Vader. I would say just behind Poe Dameron. It's doing really well for me. Our next one is Star Wars Revelations, which was released super early. So a lot of the things that are happening in here aren't really understood until you read some stuff that just came out like last month. It's very hallucination like storytelling. It's not bad. I was actually kind of surprised. It's one that probably the hardest Star Wars comic I've ever read in my life. Ahead of the Darth Maul miniseries. I don't think it's as good as the Kenobi one.
So let's move on to High Republic Adventures Phase 2, again by Daniel Jose Older. This tells the story of Sav Maligan as kind of an early apprentice, late youngling. This was a pretty disappointing book, especially compared to Adventures Phase 1. Adventures Phase 2 is more about the type of stuff you would expect in an Adventures level story. It's kid friendly, it's more fun. It doesn't have the stakes or the connections to the novels that you'd expect from a High Republic comic book. I think overall this is a C tier for me, although I do love Dexter Jetster and Therm Scissor Punch showing up.
I would agree with that placement. I think it's fine. You get a little bit of a perspective. This is the only visual media that gives a sense of the scale of the Battle of Jeddah and like all the forces there, which is pretty interesting. But the first like 5 issues are just about like Sav being like a fangirl about everything here, and then kind of getting in with some of these villains after being with the whole Takadana crew under Maz Kanata. Next up, we have the High Republic miniseries, The Blade. This is quite good. I mean, for a man who's been called the Blade of Bardota, yet he's the guy who's cooking all these pastries and foods. I was not expecting this to be such a good miniseries, but I think the addition of the actual character Barish, the stuff that's happening here being so disconnected and very frontier, very adventure like, it's good. I would say bottom of A, top of B.
Yeah, I like that placement too. This was my favorite of the Phase 2 comics. I really enjoyed this. I thought Charles Soule's writing here was great. It gave me everything I wanted from a Blade of Bardotta story with a really nice brother sister dynamic here. It's one of my favorite Star Wars miniseries I've read in quite a while. I think, like The Rise of Kylo Ren, I wish it was longer. I wish there was more, but we are getting a sequel to it eventually. 2015 is kind of throwing me off because I don't know if I'd put it higher than that, but I would say I think it belongs at the bottom of A.
All right, Son of Staros, a miniseries that I didn't think would be really worth a reading, and it's fun, honestly. I think there's some really cool things. It definitely takes place after a lot of her adventures in Star Wars Dr. Aphra 2020 line. Seeing the connections to their ancestor in the High Republic era was pretty interesting as well. It's not anything incredible, like mid to bottom B. I put it ahead of Obi-Wan. I think it's better than Obi-Wan.
Next is the High Republic Adventures: The Nameless Terror. This is a really good miniseries as well, and has alien vibes from the film. It's about these Jedi and some of the survivors of the Path of Open Hand being stalked by some of the Nameless. I'd put it towards the top of B, personally.
Yeah, I feel like it's almost interchangeable placement wise with the High Republic Marvel line Phase 2. It's just such a different story. And it's one that doesn't necessarily break any new ground, but it is very cool to see the alien inspiration. It's good. I really like the vibes of it, and I think it didn't overstep its stay. I think it hit exactly what it needed to. Next up, we have the one shot from Claudia Gray. This is a story that's like another 50 years before Phase 2, which makes it very intriguing for what its consequences are. And its major consequences, there's a jewel that's split into two that are in the rods. I was expecting something richer. This felt like something that was going to be more like a real quest. The cover feels very aquatic, and it all happens basically on a castle. And for Claudia Gray, I don't think that writing was that great, so I would put it somewhere in the C's, maybe mid to low C.
Yeah, I would too. Maybe right ahead of Monster of Temple Peak. It's a story that I think works fine as a one shot. I wish there were more pages to it because we've been getting these like 30-page one shots. One shots back in the day used to be like giant size 60, 80, 100 page. All right, we're finally on the last thing here. We've got the Edge of Balance Precedent. Since this is a prequel story to the Edge of Balance Volumes 1 and 2, we included it as a separate entry. This is a lot better than Edge of Balance, in my opinion. It's a lot more snappy story. It's a story that feels like it has some actual stakes and importance and consequence. It does a great job of connecting Phase 2 and Phase 1 as well. For me, this is a B tier story.
Really do like this. I do. It's such an improvement over the first two. It's almost an epilogue to Phase 1, 2. The nightmare fuel of surviving an encounter with the Nameless but not being physically destroyed and turned to ash was a very cool thing to see. I'd say behind Aphra. I think that's a good spot for it.
All right, so that's our tier list. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed that. Here's one last look at all of the tiers with our S tiers all the way through F, as you can see, with the stacks of Bs. There have been a lot of Star Wars comics in canon that were pretty good and not great, which is unfortunate, but I think that is kind of in the history of Star Wars comics all around. We have so much that sometimes we get a bit of quantity over quality. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure you hit that like button if you haven't. Subscribe to the channel for more Star Wars content. If you'd like to see more Star Wars comic content, let us know in the comments below. We just did a Star Wars comic book bracket. Make sure you're watching all of our other videos we posted. We posted a lot of theories recently. We do have Legends Book Club returning here soon as well, with the final book in the Thrawn trilogy, The Last Command. And of course, if you are not subscribed, subscribing is the best way to stay up with all of our content. We're going to have a lot of Ahsoka coverage coming here soon. Make sure you subscribe for all that. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.